All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another show of Drip Talk with me, Blake Disney Roberts. I have another very special guest with me on here tonight. He is no other than a former professional wrestler. He has wrestled for WCW, WWE, NWA, GCW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, AGPW, WrestleCade, and then much, much more. He is no other than Jeff Farmer. He's also known as NWO Sting, Lightning, Cobra, and Super J. So we're going to get him on in here, and then we will start on with the interview.
Hey Blake, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you for taking your time out to do this.
Sure.
All right, so I'll start off by asking you my first question. When did you start doing wrestling and what made you want to do it?
It's an interesting question. I really was not really a professional wrestling fan per se when I was a young man, when I was a kid. I grew up in the Florida area, and so I was familiar with Florida Championship Wrestling, but I was more of a football player. And it just really wasn't necessarily pro wrestling wasn't something that I really ever thought about really getting involved in. But I of course watched it a little bit as a kid, but there wasn't any real strong desire to really want to be a professional wrestler. It kind of actually was my good friend and tag team partner Thunder, when we were Thunder and Lightning, who asked, he says, "Hey, do you want to get into professional wrestling?" And I said, "Sure." So we ended up going to a school down in Tampa, Florida, that Steve Kern was had down there, and that's how we kind of started out as professional wrestlers.
Oh, wow. So you two started together. That's awesome. How did like WCW scout you both out and keep you as a tag team for both of you?
Well, we were the tag team champions of the International Wrestling Federation, the IWF, which was based out of Orlando. A guy named Eddie Mansfield actually was running that promotion at the time. And we were working at Universal Studios in Orlando. There, we had a Eddie had worked out a deal with taping at Universal. So we were kind of starting to get a little more recognition there, and the WCW had done some scouting and knew who we were. Again, we were the tag team champions of that small league, and they invited us for a tryout.
Sweet. When you watched wrestling as a kid, who was your favorite wrestler growing up?
Well, again, as I said, I didn't really watch it all that much. Dusty Rhodes, was probably one of the, as just as a character that I thought was pretty impressive. I was always impressed with the physiques. I was an Arnold Schwarzenegger fan as a kid, and I remember seeing Tony Atlas, just a
Yeah.
tremendous physique on him. And I remember going, wow, that it didn't really matter what moves he did. Just kind of watching him move around in the ring was impressive to see someone kind of that size. So it wasn't so much the wrestling aspect. It was just seeing somebody that size and going, wow, that's pretty impressive. And in that era, it was really the era of a lot of the big men. So that was kind of a
Hmm.
you didn't see someone that looked like they could come off the street and get in a ring. You saw someone that was obviously a physical specimen, and that was impressive.
Yes, most definitely. If you watch the business now, who do you like to watch now and who's your favorite?
I don't really watch it too much right now. I know there's a lot of talented wrestlers right now in the business, which I think is good. I think, as I said, part of the reason in the early days, which would have been in the '90s, it was really kind of a big man's game, right? If you weren't, a big guy, you probably weren't going to really get a chance to get in there. So, I think that changed. I mean, there was always the cruiserweights later, and in in New Japan, they had a cruiserweight league. So there was an area for the guys that weren't quite as physical big, because it does limit, you look at some of the really athletic ones like Rey Mysterio, he's not that big, but wow, what he can do in a ring, is amazing. So having that
Yep.
open up, I think today is a little different than when I was kind of starting out.
Most definitely. Yeah. Was there anybody that you would say inspired you family wise to get into the business?
What do you mean by that, really? Like family wise? You mean like a wrestling family?
Yeah.
No, I didn't really know. I mean, there's a lot of nepotism in professional wrestling, obviously, and there's a lot of families that are second, third generation wrestlers, like the Guerreros come to mind. And I wrestled Eddie many times, and Eddie was Guerrero was to me, one of the best wrestlers that there was. And he's a family, it's a family business for them, generational, as I said. The Rock, his father was in it. You look at the Samoans and the Islanders. They have a tremendous heritage in the professional wrestling business. They've done a lot. The Von Erichs are just that movie I actually saw about the Iron Claw, which was good. You have families, obviously that have been in the business for a long time. Dusty Rhodes is an example. Cody and all the family are involved. Dustin. So it is kind of closed, not closed, but a smaller kind of thing. So it's interesting that it's there is a lot of great families with a lot of legacy that are in the business. I didn't have anybody that I knew. I wasn't connected with any families, which is I just kind of came in, and Clark and I basically tried to get into the business, which we did, but we didn't really have any kind of family in or any kind of connection.
Yeah. Who would you say has been the stiffest wrestler you've gone in the ring with so far in your career?
Oh my goodness. It depends. I mean, you have to kind of quantify stiffness. I think there's guys that tend to be a little sloppy. They're just not really physically as precise as other people. So there's some of that. Some guys are just heavy to move around. They're just not athletic. And hopefully not everybody. I mean, you're not trying to intentionally be stiff necessarily. But in Japan, especially, it's a snug business, and it's much more. What is the word? Just a little tighter, and definitely some stiff guys over there in New Japan. But it was just part of the style, and it's something that if you didn't want to be in there, you should find another occupation.
Yeah. Like taking on that, like Vader. I don't know if you heard much about him back then. Didn't really, he was like really stiff with the wrestlers. He wasn't safe.
Well, safety and stiff are two different things, right? So stiff,
Yeah.
you can be stiff and be safe, right? Now, Vader, but you have to understand, somebody like Vader, that was his gimmick, right? Was to be a big kind of bully. So if that's your role, if you're portraying that, in the ring for the audience, you can't go out there and kind of tiptoe around. You have to really execute that style. But safety and stiffness are kind of different, because you can be stiff and still not hurt someone and not be unsafe. I mean, we were definitely stiff, I think, in my opinion of stiff, in the ring. But as long as you're safe, and you're not trying to hurt someone, I think that makes a difference.
Yeah, most definitely. Yep. Were you ever in like any type of school or amateur wrestling as a kid?
Yeah, I was an amateur wrestler in high school. Um, but that was really just for, again, I was a football player. That's the area I was kind of focused on. But I amateur wrestled in high school just to stay in shape in the off season. So and I liked it. Amateur wrestling I was interested in. I just wasn't pursuing it really. Like I said, I was doing it to stay in shape. But amateur wrestling is a tremendous workout, and it's a great sport. And I admire a lot of the amateur wrestlers. A lot of the pro wrestlers have amateur backgrounds. And then you have Olympic champions like Kurt Angle, is an amazing wrestler. So, it's definitely a good skill to kind of at least have some of that basic wrestling, is important. I mean, some guys come in from other athletic backgrounds. They might play football and never stepped foot on a wrestling mat in their life, right? And they can still, learn the business. But obviously having some amateur background, it's probably helpful.
Yeah. Was there any other background that you did, like any type of boxing or taekwondo or anything?
No, not really. I wasn't in the martial arts. I mean, I learned a lot of that once I got in the business. Because Anoki was with the Pride over there in Japan, and so we started kind of mixing some of our pro styles with some of the MMA guys that were making that kind of crossover. So you kind of had to learn, submission holds and things because they used them there, right? So there was a learning
Yep.
curve once I was in the business about some of the submission stuff. But I hadn't had really a jujitsu or any kind of real training before I got into pro wrestling.
Was there, did you do any like type of drama class when you were in school?
No, no. I mean, I did some acting when I got out before I got into wrestling. We were in Orlando, so there was the opportunity to do some a little bit of small bit roles and acting stuff, which Clark and I both did. In Orlando. And then of course, I mean, I was a bodybuilder too back in the day, and so you have to get up on stage as a bodybuilder and kind of present your physique. So there was a little bit of that. I wouldn't say there was any real acting. I hadn't really done that, and it's a good question. And I think to be a good pro wrestler, you need to understand that you have to be able to act. And
Mm-hmm.
that are really good are really good actors. And again, I go back to Eddie Guerrero. He had a great acting presence. Not only was he technically good and understood the psychology of the business, but he learned early on that acting was a big part of it, and I think that makes a difference in somebody really being successful. Hogan, was a great actor in the ring as far as getting the sympathy with the fans when he was they were getting some heat on him. So having that skill definitely is going to make you a much better pro wrestler.
Yeah, agreed. Yep. What would you consider to be your weakness and then a strength in wrestling?
I think my weakness would have probably been I didn't really work on the microphone as much, which is a common thing because unless you have the opportunity to do it every day or a lot, right, you're gonna not be as good on the microphone. It's an interesting part of the business, and some people are just are really good at it kind of out of the get-go, and some take a long time before they get well at it. And you'll see some guys just aren't in the right role or the right fit. They're trying to be something they're not. And if you look at even someone like Stone Cold Steve Austin, when he was in WCW and he was there, he was not the character that he ended up being, with Vince. And he just kind of found his place, and then and Rock the same way. When he started out, he was just not that. He ended up finding his place and working on his craft and getting really good on that character and being able to present that character. And that takes time. That takes time, and it takes practice. And I think if you have that time and practice, you can probably develop it and get good at it. But a lot of guys never get the chance to do that necessarily. And the strength was just probably my physical. I was a good athlete, so that was probably that I could kind of move around pretty good. I think that was probably one of my strengths.
Yeah. Was it hard traveling from show to show, and what was the worst thing about traveling?
Yeah, traveling is tough, when you're living out of a suitcase. International travel is worse. Obviously, I was traveling a lot to Japan. You're on a 11 to 13-hour flight to get there, and you're in a different time zone completely, and you're out of your cycle as far as when you're sleeping and when you're up and when you're eating, and it's the opposite time. And then just getting on a bus and traveling around the country and flying, and we took ferries sometimes, and that's a lot of wear and tear on your body, and that's something that um, it's just, if you haven't done it, if you don't know it, it's just not, if you're home every night and you're going to the gym at the regular hour and you're kind of have everything scheduled, it's a lot easier when you're out traveling and trying to find accommodations and where you can eat and where you can find a gym and where you can do all that stuff. It's a lot. It's very taxing.
Yeah. Was there anybody that you like rode with during your time in the WCW?
There was a group of us, probably, I would say, that were kind of like the middle guys, that kind of hung out together. The top guys were kind of coddled, not coddled, but they obviously had it a lot easier than the mid-level guys. So we were sharing rooms a lot of times to help with expenses and sharing costs and renting cars together. And it was the group of like Chris Jericho and Eddie and that group at the time that were kind of Billy Kidman. There was a group of guys that were in there, Glenn, Disco, and that were kind of in the same kind of position. And so we kind of hung out and kind of did some of the traveling together. But I didn't really travel particularly with any one person that much. So I mean, Clark
Yeah.
early on, my tag team partner, we traveled everywhere together early. But when I got to WCW, then it was just kind of, it was, mixing it up with different people that were, wanting to share expenses.
Yep. Who was your first opponent in front of a crowd, and how did you feel going into that first match?
Well, I think our first match is a good story. Was a television match. Clark and I was a tag team match. Our first match was a TV taping, and I was sick. I was in the bathroom, wanting to puke. I mean, you just had so much nerves, um, getting out in front of an audience and the performance pressure. Like later it was, you do it so much, like in Japan, it was just like I never had that real feeling. But early on, when are doing something, there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of nerves. And once you get out there, and you feel a little more comfortable and things kind of happen, and then it's fine. But yeah, your first time is it's definitely an experience.
Yep. How would you say the crowd reacted when they seen you for the first time?
We got a good pop. We had capes. We had a pretty good gimmick. I think Clark and I kind of came up with Thunder and Lightning like early on, and we just thought we had watched the WWF at the time. The Road Warriors had the big, shoulder pads, and so we really thought that our gimmick, which was Thunder and Lightning, because we had capes and we came out and we had like thunder and crashing thunder when you first come out and the lightning flashing in the arena, was a cool kind of entrance and gimmick. And we thought it was definitely a WWF kind of idea. And it was funny because we wound up going to WCW, and the long riders back then, who were the Smoking Guns, were in the same league we were, and they went to the WWF, and we, it's like they flip flop. Like we felt like their
Yeah.
cow gimmick would have been great for WCW, and our gimmick Thunder and Lightning would have been great for WWF, but we both went to the opposite one. So, maybe they were looking to fill voids in those. I don't know, but it was, yeah, it was funny. But we got it. We were very popular in the IWF with our gimmick.
Yeah. How did you two come up with the tag team names and the whole gear idea of what you guys were doing?
It was just, we talked about doing it. We were both personal trainers at a gym actually at the time. And we knew Scott Hall. Scott was from Orlando. We were in Orlando. And before that, we knew I played football at UCF, and there was a guy named Ed the Bull Gantner who went from football at UCF to a pro wrestling. And he unfortunately died early, but he kind of led the way a little bit. I mean, again, it wasn't something I was ever planning on doing, but um, you know, we just kind of came up with what we thought was a cool, name, Thunder and Lightning, right, as a tag team. and just kind of designed some outfits, some tights and singlets. And this is, I think sometimes, I don't know 100%, but sometimes, the office has an idea about what they want you to be. They'll come up with an idea, a gimmick. I'm sure that Dustin Rhodes didn't come up with the gold dust on his own. That's not something he would probably do. But you know, if you have something that you start out with, like we had already come up with Thunder and Lightning before WCW offered us to come up there, so we weren't about to kind of change that whole thing. We already had a fan base and stuff, if you will. I mean, they could have said, "Hey, we want you to do something totally different," and we might have said, "Hey, yeah, okay." But at the time, I think sometimes you have your own character that you already have, and sometimes they're giving you something that they want you to do.
Yeah. If you could go back in time and wrestle anyone that has passed away, who would that be?
Uh, I get that question sometimes. There's really, I mean, I look back at some of the earlier matches, the Minnesota Wrecking Crew and those guys. I know Ole, Anderson just passed away actually, and I was really sad to hear that news. I knew Ole. Ole helped train me. He was kind of a mentor for me. I knew his son Brian, and a little bit. He was down at the power plant with us when we were there. And my condolences to Brian and the family. But back, I think in that time period, like in the 70s, maybe some of those matches would have probably been a lot of fun to be in. That kind of time period. So it's not really necessarily a person, but just maybe going back in that time period and when wrestling was really kind of, believable, and it was just had a really, strong fan base as far as fans that really got with what was going on.
Yeah. Who is or was your top dream opponent?
Well, someone asked me this before. We wrestled. We were a tag team. Clark and I were Thunder and Lightning, and so we did tag matches. That's how I started. And we, had a program early on in WCW with the Harlem Heat, and they were. I mean, I always liked the matches that we had with the Harlem Heat. Stevie Ray and Booker T, and it was just, it was a fun match, and we usually had a good time out there, and that was always one of my favorite, kind of tag teams to work with. We also, worked with, the Smoking Guns, again in IWF, and they were good. And, later, Scott Norton and I tagged, in New Japan, and I had some really good tag, team matches with Scott. So yeah, it's hard to pick a necessarily a favorite, but if I had to pick one, maybe Harlem Heat.
Yeah. Who is someone you would like to wrestle that you've wrestled before?
Eddie Guerrero, probably, if he was here. He's just so good, and you get guys like that that just are a pleasure to work with. They know the business so well. They're just good at making it believable and cover up any mistakes that might happen, and their timing and this. It's really, when you get to that level. And Flair has the same thing, and probably Bret Hart and all. I've never wrestled Bret, but I'm saying these kind of guys that are just really know it. That would be a fun match for me, is that type. So yeah, Bret Hart, Eddie again. I've wrestled Flair, in a maybe once in a little tag thing that we did, but I never really wrestled Flair in a singles. But yeah, that's who I'd say.
Yeah. Who would you number down to your three top favorite opponents as a single competitor and as a tag team competitor?
Well, Eddie at the top of the list. As a single, um, that's a tough question. I mean, you had guys like Bobby Eaton and just a pleasure to work, and the Armstrongs. There's so many guys that were just good workers that you want to get in a match and have, you want to get in the ring and have a match with those kind of guys. As far as tag teams, as I said, maybe the Booker T and Stevie Ray, the Harlem Heat, and the matches in Japan with some of the tag matches with like Kojima and Tenzan. just again, those kind of matches are so much fun. And Hiro Saito, there was a lot of great talent there, and working sometimes can be really challenging and hard, and other times it can be really a lot of fun, and you're glad to be doing it. So it's kind of, it depends. And it depends where you are and which arena, and who's the audience, and a lot of factors that are involved in that. But that's what I would say.
Yeah. Do you usually get along and become friends with most of your opponents?
Fortunately, yeah, yeah. Love the guys in Japan. They're like family for me. I spent almost 5 years over there, and you're on the bus with them. You're in tight quarters. You're basically living on the road with these guys, and we're all traveling together. And it's hard not to really develop these kind of friendships and bonds with your fellow wrestlers. Scott Norton and I, of course, were over there together for years and years. And some people you wrestle and you never see them again. I've wrestled in Europe and some other places, and you might wrestle someone and you never wrestle them again. And other people you end up seeing on down the road, and you wrestle them multiple times. Lex Luger and I wrestled many times, and it depends, and but luckily, I always try to do a good job, and I always try to treat all my opponents and everybody I work with respect, and and hopefully got the same from them. So yeah, it's, I mean, you're going to have clashes and differences sometimes, and it's like any family where there's squabbles or fights, and that's okay. You still love each other, and you still have that bond, and that's what's important.
Yeah. So if you could make a Survivor Series match, including you with four wrestlers from WCW or current, which wrestlers would you choose to be on your team?
Well, who just retired? I know you, Sting. I mean, obviously, I owe a lot to Sting because I was NWO Sting in Japan. So, and Sting and Lex for sure would be on there. Lex Luger, and it's a little deviate a little bit from what your question is, but in WCW, when I came in there, and I'm not a starstruck kind of person, but this is back in the 90s, and Sting was at the top of his game, and Lex too. They were both and they were really role models for us younger guys. I'm not that much younger than them, but younger as far as inexperienced, right? When I came in, they were already at the top, and you see guys like that are really the examples of how you want to be as a wrestler, and that was impressive. So I take some of those guys on my team.
Yeah, for sure. Would you rather be in a street fight or a death match?
I don't want to be in either of those. Probably a street fight. I don't know. I think some of the death match stuff is to me is a little over the top. I don't know that much about those kind of matches. It's not my time or my genre, so to speak. And I'm sure people that like that and enjoy that kind of, either to do it and to watch it. Right? There's a fan base that wants to watch that, and there's guys that want to do that. Right? And I know they get out like light bulbs and a lot of stuff and glass, and it seems to me very dangerous. Right? And a good way to get a trip to the hospital. So I think that's not very smart. And if you have to do all of this to entertain people, I think you're that's not pro wrestling, right? Pro wrestling is wrestling, and if you're bringing out weapons and props and all this kind of stuff, I think it starts to kind of water down what pro wrestling really is. So I probably neither of those.
Yeah. Would you rather be in a blindfolded match, handcuffed to your opponent, or a dog collar?
You got some crazy questions, Blake. I mean, some of these things I'm not aware of really what they are, but I'll take a dog collar, I guess. At least I can look around and see whatever. And I know that there's some of these kind of matches are designed to change it, right? Because it can get boring if you're just watching matches after matches and everybody's doing the same thing. And then that's why you have a cage match. That's why you have, a Royal Rumble and these other kind of things. And I think you can mix that up and put some of those kind of stipulations and things into wrestling. But I think if you deviate too much from pro wrestling, I think that's you're at odds of really kind of making it something else, right? And jumping off of a 30-foot building onto a table is not a wrestling move. It's a stunt. And so, yeah, if you want to watch stunts, you could have a stuntman competition and everybody can see who can do the most crazy stunt, right? But that's different
Yeah.
than a pro wrestling match. So, and you're trying to tell a story. It's hard to tell a story where someone goes up and jumps off the roof or something. So to me, that's just my take on it. But like I said, maybe there's a genre of people that really enjoy that and want to see people almost kill themselves. I don't know.
Yeah. Is there any piece of merch that you have or had that sold out pretty quickly?
I'm not a merch kind of guy really. When we were in New Japan, the NWO at that time, I mean, we were selling out of everything, right? So we were at the time, the NWO in Japan was a really hot, ticket, and they couldn't keep products. They didn't have enough stuff there. I think they ended up making their own T-shirts in Japan to try to fill the void because they were selling out of everything. So probably during that run, I mean, that's not me and personally, it was the NWO stuff, but when we were over there, that was probably a very, very hot commodity at the time.
Yeah. What was the difference between like the US fans and the Japan fans? What was that
Well,
like?
there is a difference, and it's interesting. The Japanese culture, it's just always impressed me anyway. And but they're very respectful of the business of the wrestlers. They know all of your moves. They know what you do, kind of where you came from. It's a very educated, audience, right? So they know what the submission holds, how they work and what they do, and how, it's not like they're coming and going, oh, we don't really know anything, we just want you to entertain us, right? It's not
Yeah.
that in Japan. They are smart and they know, and they're waiting for these kind of things to happen, and which is also, it's a tribute to the fans, because they don't do like in the US. You'd have somebody come out with a boa and flash and all this kind of stuff and lighting and all, yeah, and then the match would be very one-sided and it would be just like a show, right? And they want to see a match. They want to see a wrestling match. And so it was the respect that the opponents got was just as much as the champion, or almost as much, or whatever the other opponent is. And they wanted to see a competitive wrestling match, and that's what was expected. So definitely different. I think of course you have hardcore fans in the US that know everybody's moves and know everything and know all the history, like any sport or any kind of something that you might follow. But for sure, the Japanese fans were amazing and respectful. I mean, they would stomp their feet sometimes, on the stadium instead of clapping. And if you've ever been over there in Corrigan Hall and just heard the whole place, being foot stomped, it's an amazing experience.
Yeah. Did you have to learn like Japanese?
Skoshi, no, a little. You don't have to learn it. I mean, some guys really did not speak any English over there. So it was hard to communicate sometimes, and it's hard to call. You didn't really call that much in the ring, or even the finishes sometimes were, it was tough. But you kind of learned a little bit, enough to get around and say hi and order food and things like that. I wish I would have spent a little more time learning the language. It's just something I regret doing, just not, trying to immerse myself a little bit more into the culture. I mean, I was very impressed and love the Japanese culture and the people, and just wish I would have spent a little more time learning the language.
Yeah. Is there any time a fan has seen you in public and got super surprised and or excited?
The Japanese fans, it's yeah. I painted my face some, of course, as NWO Sting, so they don't really know. I mean, they can tell your body. Obviously, they in Japan, you don't look the same, and you're a lot bigger than they are, and so they're looking at you. They know you're doing something, and then when they recognize it, they can get pretty excited. Um, but most of my career was not, enough to where people would have been, oh, that's Lightning of Thunder and Lightning. When you're at shows, yeah, if you're around those group of people that are fans, they're gonna know. But if not, you're just walking around, you're not gonna really. No one's gonna know for me who I was. But obviously, someone else, people might go, oh, that you can't go anywhere without being noticed.
Yep. What is your favorite horror movie and favorite horror character if you have one?
I'm not a big horror fan. I don't like scary movies too much. So I don't really have a favorite horror movie. But I mean, Halloween, with Jason with the mask and all that stuff, those are pretty scary. But I'm not a real horror movie buff. I love movies and I watch a lot of movies, but I just don't really watch that genre very much.
Yeah. What would you say is generally your favorite music to listen to in your spare time to like help you calm down or during your time in WCW when you like worked out or before you prepared for a match or something?
I again, I love music and probably rock. Rock and roll from even from the '70s. Some early rock groups were impressive. I like different genres of music. I love the blues, so I used to listen to a lot of blues. I really didn't, play something to get me hyped up, for matches. I don't know why, I mean, just not something I really did or really to come down after. It wasn't really as much as I like music. It was just kind of wasn't really something that I mixed with pro wrestling. I mean, obviously you have an entrance song and that might fire you up and fire up people, and they're going to kind of know, what is when your music plays. But personally, I wasn't, really walking around with headphones or anything like that.
Yeah. If a movie was made about your career, who would you want to play you?
Hmm. Wow. Um, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea who could really play me right now, and I don't know the younger actors. Um, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. If you got to choose the stipulation for your match, what stipulation would you choose?
Stipulation. Um, Probably something where I broke the rules. Not having count outs. Something like that where you have to win the match a certain way.
Yeah. What has been a funniest thing a fan has said to you before?
Hmm. Fans say all kinds of crazy stuff. It's amazing what sometimes they'll say to you. I remember wrestling Harlem Heat once in a very like Alabama or somewhere like that, and just some of the comments were just it was a very strange kind of experience to have some of the fans just almost believe it so much that they want you to it's very strange. So you never know what fans are going to say.
Yeah. What has been a best fan compliment you've received either at like a show or convention?
Um, just that they were, really excited that to watch my matches and to have followed my career. I mean, there's some people that really followed everything all the way through. in New Japan, especially, like when you have somebody who knows that much about your history, right? It's kind of, shocking. And so someone who really did their homework and knew a lot about, because, if you pop up in something like, the NWO and it's NWO Sting coming down and it's all that, or you're doing Cobra or you're doing Thunder and Lightning, then you're in New Japan and then you're doing Super J and then you're Team 2000. Like a lot of people don't know, where all of those, places that you've kind of done stuff, even overseas. I was doing stuff in Austria and worked a tour over there. I worked a tour in India once, and where we had a brawl. We had basically a riot in the town up in the northern India in Chandigarh, which was crazy. And like that kind of stuff, if a fan says, "Oh yeah, I watched that tour, or I heard about that," you're kind of like, "Whoa." So some of that's shocking when they really know a lot about your career.
Yeah, most definitely. And talking about conventions, you were at WrestleCade like a couple years back in like I think 2019. What was that like for you to be asked to come to? I Was that like your first convention?
I don't do a lot of those kind of things. I just don't really have a need to, I mean, it's not, I get invited sometimes and don't go to those things. So if, Scott Norton or somebody says, "Hey, why don't you come to this," or whatever. And, I talk to the promoter and they want you to come, whatever. So, I'll do it sometimes, but I don't do it that much. But it's great, seeing the fans that remember, back then. And it's great seeing some of the boys that I haven't seen in a while, and wrestlers that I wrestled with in WCW or overseas or wherever. I mean, I think the one I was at, Muda, was at the one I went to, and it was great seeing him, in the States. Yeah, I always see him in Japan, so it was nice to see him here. And it's nice to kind of reminisce and go back a little bit and see some of that. Some of them kind of, remember everything, and some of them, I mean, I saw the Iron Sheik, who I went to India with. We were on that tour together. And, I don't think he necessarily remembered some of it, and so that's a little sad, but, it's always good seeing the guys.
Yeah. Was Sting at that show?
I don't think he was there.
Yeah, I don't really remember either because I did look at a little bit of it before the interview, and I seen that you were in a Royal Rumble, but I don't think I seen anything of Sting. So I was just asking to see if you knew about that.
I think, I don't think he did a lot either. I think he might now, but I don't think he was doing a lot then. I don't think he was making a lot of appearances, as I don't either, really, so, but,
Yeah.
I think he's done some more recently, though.
Yep. Which wrestler has given you the best advice and or compliment?
Probably Scott Norton. So, when I went to New Japan, I first went actually to All Japan. Clark and I did a tag team tournament there in 1993, I think. Uh, and I hated it. It was terrible. I mean, it was just it was a tough experience, and the rest of the guys weren't all that friendly. And I get it. We were a new tag team. We're coming in trying to take somebody's position and their spot in the company, and there's a lot of competitive nature to the business in general, and also it's putting food on the table for a lot of these guys. So understood that. And when I went to New Japan, from WCW, I really was not ready to. I didn't know what to expect and what was going to happen and what they wanted from me and all this stuff. And Scott Norton, who had been there for years and was the IWGP heavyweight champion of New Japan, knew everything. He knew exactly what they wanted me to do and how they wanted us to do it, and that was invaluable. I mean, so someone like Scott, who was just able to guide me along through there. I mean, there was other people like Black Cat, who was part of the company of New Japan, who spoke English perfectly well, and a lot of people that Masa Saito, was a mentor for me, and Masa, I love Masa to death, and But I would say as one of the wrestlers, probably Scott. And I think it can be difficult because you don't always want to give someone help when you're doing the same job, right? Because you kind of might be like, oh
Yep.
well, maybe this guy's going to take my position. You have to be unthreatened to do that. You have to be confident enough in yourself to say, hey, I'm going to help this kid, I'm going to help this guy, and we're going to get him up to speed and try to help him. And if you're not confident in your own abilities, you can't do that. And so yeah, Scott was a true gem, and we're still good friends today. I still talk to Scott on a regular basis, and he's doing great.
Yeah. About that, who are some other wrestlers that you still talk to this day and you get along with?
I don't talk to many wrestlers hardly at all. Scott's probably the only Clark and I, we're he's like a brother for me, so I talk to Clark. But other than that, I don't really talk to too many wrestlers. I mean, I had good relationships with them, and if I saw them, I'd be happy to see them. But it's your life moves on, and you're doing different stuff, and you're not in the same circles anymore, and you're not traveling together, and you just kind of very easy to drift apart from a lot of people that you were close to.
Yeah. Do you prefer being a heel or babyface more in wrestling?
Um, they're both interesting. It's nice to be cheered, and it's nice to get out there and have all the accolades and adoration from fans. But it's fun to be the heel. It's a lot more fun to have the liberty to go out there and cause a disturbance and break the rules and yell at fans. So it's a lot more fun to be the bad guy, and you have less parameters that you have to stay in. But the good guy, is being a fan favorite. That's hard to not be happy about that. I remember when we were Thunder and Lightning, and we didn't turn. I just remember when we dropped the straps, to the long riders, where it ended up being the Smoking Guns. We were so. It's just like, even though this is going to happen, it's hard. So it's they're two different things, but both of them have their merit.
Yep. Was there ever a time in your career you ever got kicked out of a wrestling show you were wrestling at?
No, no. I mean, no. You know,
Yeah.
not I try to stay within the rules, and there's a lot of guys that and in New Japan, there was the reputation. Some of the Americans were and part of that was you know just trying to be that way, right? Trying to be the big American bully. That's what they wanted us to kind of be. So you, in a way, you're kind of living up to the reputation that's there. But you have to conduct yourself in a professional way and in a respectful way in any promotion, I think. And I think it's important to do that. And so, yeah, I've never been thrown out, of any promotion.
Yeah. Is there any stories of like a crowd member coming out of the crowd and like attacking you or ever witnessing it?
Yeah, Clark and I, we were wrestling in, I don't know where it was, a small town, and it might have been even a bar. It was I think, a bar room, and I think, I don't know if we must have been the bad guys in this match, because I remember the crowd turning on us, and we had to kind of back to back get out of this place together. I was on one side, and he was on the other, and kind of back to back got ourselves out of there. And then the other thing was India. I mentioned this briefly, but we actually, India it was an amazing story that um, the they had wooden rails around the ring, right, to keep the audience back. And I think some local police officers that were off duty, that were amateur wrestlers or part of an amateur wrestling club or something like that, were upset that they said, this pro wrestling is fake and it's not real, and these guys aren't real athletes, and blah blah blah. So they jumped over the railing and engaged with a couple of the wrestlers that were wrestling at the time. And Bill Eadie was one. I don't know if you know Bill Eadie was a Smash with Demolition,
Yep.
and a guy named Chris Walker was
Oh yeah.
who, you know who that is? Yeah, he
Yep.
did. He did like a Ultimate Warrior knockoff thing that he was kind of doing. Don't know what they called him. And Barry Horowitz was a referee of this thing. I think. I'm not sure if he worked matches. I think he might have, but I know he was reffing this match in particular. And like the guys jumped the fence, and both Bill and Chris, started fighting them, and the security people that were around the ring, they actually attacked the wrestlers, and like this big, huge kind of brawl broke out, and I'd already worked, and I remember running down. Someone said, "You got to come out and help," right away. So I remember I had my gear still on, so I was wrestling as Thunder, I think, and I ran down and grabbed Chris, who was severely injured. He had a bad gash over his eye where they hit him with the butt of a rifle, I think. I don't know how he got it. I think that's how he got it. And got him into the back. And Bill Eadie ended up walking back on his own power, and they were hitting him with billy clubs. And it was crazy, mayhem. And, that was probably the wildest, experience in India, up by Pakistan in northern India that I've ever experienced. And thankfully, it was Tiger Jet Singh, who I think was a promoter, and his son was there, and he ended up getting the crowd back under control. But this, there was people had knives, in their belts. It was like not a safe place to have this happen, and
Yeah.
that was probably the wildest experience.
Wow. Crazy.
Yeah.
If you could wrestle for any company right now, what company would that be?
Um, again, I don't really watch that much. Um, I guess AEW that's a company, right? Or is it right?
Yep.
AEW, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what happens, and I think it's bad, is that at least when you had WCW and you had the WWE at the same time, right? You had two big kind of competing companies, and I think that was good for the business. It was good for the fans. It was good for obviously the talent, right? They had more options, and then when you had WCW fold up and basically Vince McMahon bought the rights to that, you end up kind of taking away your competition. It's kind of like Burger King and McDonald's, right? If you don't
Yep.
have the option to go to Burger King every once in a while, you only stuck going to McDonald's, you're going to be like, yeah, I don't want to always go there. So I think not having those competing companies really kind of hurts the business and hurt. Now, I don't know if AEW is moving up that where it can be that for the business and have enough cloud and enough fan base so that it'll be the same. Then you have these two competing. Again, I don't watch it really anymore, but hopefully that will happen and have at least more options for not only the fans to see, but for the talent to work, because the only way, as I said earlier, was to really hone your talent is to do it, to get on the microphone and to get in the ring and do all that stuff. That takes reps, takes repetition. So hopefully there'll be something like that.
Yeah, AEW is a great business because all the legends and they seem to take all of like the WWE Hall of Famers and legends and stuff like that. And that's where Sting had his last match.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and you have to know something that especially the guys like Sting and that Sting is and hats off to him for wrestling as long as he did. I think it's amazing. It's a testament to the guy staying physically fit and staying in shape and still being able to do it. And I'm a big fan of his. Before I did the NWO Sting, I was a fan of his. And my hat's off to him doing that. And I think what you have when you have guys like that are in that business, like you said, the legends coming from WCW or the WWF that are coming over there, these they have so much knowledge. They have so much understanding of the business and how it's supposed to run and how it's supposed to work. And I think that's kind of in a way lost because, you had sometimes you had guys that just jumped in there and they didn't really pay their dues. They didn't really go on the road forever and learn how to call in the ring and do all this stuff and go through all the training. So you're putting some guy in there, yeah, he can talk good on the microphone and he's athletic and he can do the moves and we can train him, but it's not the same as being out on the road and learning the business. And Flair and Sting and Lex and all those guys, Hacksaw, Jim Duggan, those guys, all those guys learned it the hard way. They learned it from being out there on the road, doing it day in, day out. And that's a big difference, because if you're coming in, you're doing one match once in a while, that's not the same thing. And, to be out there
Yep.
grinding it out. And those guys that have that kind of experience are gonna make the business much better.
Yeah. What would you say was your most favorite company you've got to wrestle for?
That's a good question, but I'll say it's New Japan for sure. And I think just the way I was treated in New Japan, the company itself, the office in New Japan, the whole culture. And I'm not talking about the Japanese culture. I'm talking about the culture around the wrestling business, how they respected, everything there. There wasn't, I'm not knocking the U.S. wrestling that much. I'm not trying to. I had a great experience in WCW and, which was fine. But when you go to somewhere and it's in WCW, there was a lot of little cliques and groups. And if you weren't in the favor of this group and they were kind of had the power to promote the show or not promote the show, you would have not been able to maybe have a match or get what you wanted or whatever. And if you went with this group, maybe you could. And there was a lot of this going on. And to just go in there and do your job and to not worry about the politics in the office and not worry about the politics behind the scenes and who was friends with who and who's sleeping with who and whatever, all that stuff. And none of that is on the table. You're just going out there and you're doing your job and you're working. And if you can do it and do it well, you're rewarded and they're happy to have you and they want you to come back. And if you can't, you can't. But it was just like, in a way, New Japan was what you kind of got the value of your hard work was returned. Whereas in WCW, maybe your hard work was not returned or your hard work didn't really matter because, somebody could not work as hard as you, but still have a spot or whatever it may be. So definitely New Japan. And again, it was just how the company was run, how the business was run. Everything was on time. Nobody was late. The guys would set up the ring and set up the merchandise and everything was just very well organized, like a well organized machine. You got up, they had you ready to get on the bus. There wasn't a lot of things that weren't thought of and thought out. And to me, that was impressive to see a business run like that.
Yeah, definitely. Would you rather join DX, APA, or BWO? And I usually say NWO, but you've obviously already been in that, so.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I know what's the second one?
So DX,
I know that.
APA, or BWO.
APA was Ron Simmons and those guys. I would take Ron Simmons and those guys. So I'd say APA. Right? Wasn't that? And Justin and Bradshaw or something were in that?
Yep, Ron Simmons, JBL.
Yeah. I wrestled Ron Simmons. I'm a big fan of Ron Simmons. He's awesome. And what a tremendous athlete that guy was and is. And I would have been I'd probably been on Ron Simmons' team for sure. I don't know Bradshaw, but I do know Ron, and I would have chosen that team.
Yeah.
I don't know what the BWO was. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, that was like a faction during the ECW time with like Blue Meanie and them.
Yeah. Nah, thanks.
Would you rather join the Four Horsemen or Evolution?
Four Horsemen.
Yeah.
That's the old school guys. And again, you're talking about Arn Anderson, just another tremendous Arn Ole, Barry Windham. I knew Blackjack. Blackjack, trained me down at the power plant. These are, again, Flair. These are guys that even Tully Blanchard. I didn't know Tully, but I know he was in there for a while. And Magnum. You're talking about these are old school guys that know the business, knew what they were doing, were tremendous hands, tremendous talent in the ring, and I mean that's for sure. Those guys are all legends, and those guys and I don't think you can duplicate that now. You're not going to find another 4 or 5 guys together that can kind of do and be what those guys were, and I just think the business doesn't have it. I mean, I know there's a lot of good groups out there now, but I'll say the Four Horsemen.
Yep. If you could have any band or singer perform your theme song, who would you want that to be?
Maybe Arcade Fire. I like them. They're cool. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a tough one. A lot of great, bands and great music and a lot of genres. Uh, it's hard to pick one. What's his name? Greg Allman. Back in the day, the Allman Brothers. That's probably a cool band to do your song.
Mm-hmm. What is a least favorite wrestling move to have happen to you?
I think it's I've had a lot of moves. I think it's the Frankensteiner or whatever that kind of thing is. I don't know really where they leg scissor your head and then they do a flip. I
Yeah.
jam I jam my head neck on that. I think Muda gave it to me one time, and uh, a guy in All Japan used to use it. I think it was Doug Furness that might have used it over there. Anyway, if you don't hit that right, it's hard to do, and it's hard to to not mess up on that move. It can be tough. Yeah, you can jam your head right into the mat, so that's not really fun. Pile driver
Yeah.
too. If the pile driver is not done properly, that's not a fun one to be in. If you don't trust the guy that's giving it to you, it can be perfect. I use the pile driver a lot in Japan, and if you know what you're doing, it's good. But if they don't know what they're doing, that can be a dangerous move. There's a lot of moves that are dangerous. That you know
Yep.
if not performed correctly, you can certainly severely injure and kill someone. So you it's needs to be taken seriously, and you need to think about that. I was in Japan when one of the wrestlers died over there, from a hematoma, and a good friend Brian Johnson who was there, had a blood clot in his trap that ended up going to his brainstem, and it's terrible. I mean, thankfully he recovered, but never going to get in the ring again. So you're taking a chance, and it's one of those things. I mean, when I played football, I felt safer because I had a helmet, I had shoulder pads, and I could, it's a little different when you're in the ring. You're exposed. You don't have protective equipment on. I mean, so you're not really wearing something that's going to protect you from some of the impact that you're going to receive, and you have to be careful. Like anything, you try to put that out of your mind because you're doing it every night, but every time I stepped through those ropes, I was aware that something bad a bad injury could happen. It's just the nature of the business.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had multiple other guests say the pile driver as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that can be. I mean, if you trust a person doing it and they know what they're doing, it's perfectly safe. Like I took a pile driver from Paul Orndorff, and Paul was great at it. And I'll take it if he
Yep.
was here now. I'd take another one. But there's certain guys that I think again it has to do with. I mentioned earlier, some being sloppy or not. Some people are doing moves that they're not capable of doing. Like if you're not strong enough to do a move, right? If you don't have the strength to pick someone up over your head, then you need to be careful about attempting a move like that if you can't execute it. If you can't suplex someone properly, if you can't, give them a belly to belly and not be able to rotate them and land them safely on their back, you shouldn't give that move to someone. And I think nobody tells you that. There's not any kind of, rule, but you need to take care of the person who's giving you their body, because you're not going to be able to toss someone around if they don't necessarily want to be tossed around. So it is important to be capable, and if you're not capable, you shouldn't be doing it. And that's where things can get dangerous really fast. And I think you talk about some of those things where you can't control, jumping off a building or something like that. I mean, those things are scary because you know you want to control as much as you can.
Yeah, for sure. What would you say has been the hardest move you have tried to do to an opponent before?
The hardest move to do to someone, um,
Yeah.
probably having to do with lifting someone, up, and I was a strong. I mean, that was my style. Was a lot of power moves, right? And so I did them, but you know, uh, when you're picking somebody up and throwing them, that can be difficult. That can be hard to do. And a part of it is, if they're not wanting to go, on this move, and then you're going to take them anyway, you're going to give it to them whether they want it or not, then you're really having to exert a lot more force, because to do it properly again and safely, you need to do it. And if they're trying to sandbag you or hold back, that can be that you're going to have to really give it to them, and that can be tough. I mean, some people are easier to move around than others. You're dealing with a person who's 300 and something pounds, and you got to pick them up and toss them around, and that can be tough if you're not strong enough to do it.
Yep. If you could take any signature move from any other wrestler to do, what signature move would that be?
Hmm. I mean, I like Stone Cold Stunner thing just because it looks so much fun, and it seems like it's a simple move. I mean, it's not complicated, but it just looks, fun. And so probably something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
with moves, it's kind of hard sometimes because, a lot of stuff has already been done by somebody, right? You can't go back and,
Yep.
if you go back and look at whatever moves, people were doing stuff, 50 years ago, and then, I mean, you can create new moves and people can make variations of moves, but a lot of this stuff is already somebody's done it, and it might not be famous or whatever, but somebody's done it. So it's hard to kind of come up with something brand new and also something safe. Again, like I said, you can do something, a new move, but it might be really dangerous. And then you're talking about, injuring someone severely, and that's terrible, or ending their career, something like that. So there is the key is finding something safe, but also maybe looks devastating, right? And that's a fine line. That's a fine line to kind of be in.
Yep. For sure. Have you ever wrestled or done anything in Wisconsin before?
Hmm. I don't think so. But, I have to tell you, Blake, sometimes people say, "Do you remember when you wrestled here and when you were there?" And I'm like, "No, not really." So I think maybe I've been hitting the head a lot. Maybe that's my excuse I can use. Um, I don't know that I've been in Wisconsin. I don't think so. Why? Is that where you're from?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I know Wisconsin is a good area, and I know that, those, like I said, the guys from Minnesota, wrestled in Wisconsin a lot, and a lot of those guys, the old school guys, like I said, I mentioned Ole and Scott's from Minnesota, and Kurt Hennig was from Minnesota, and Rick Rude, I think, was from Minnesota. So you had a really good territory, northern territory up there in that area. So, Minnesota, Wisconsin, it was a little pocket of really, really good talent. I think the Road Warriors came from there. And then I think you had Florida Championship Wrestling, where you had another group that was kind of in Florida, the Briscoes and the Grahams. I think they might have been here. I mean, there's a whole group in Florida, and then you had the Georgia group. There was a group in Atlanta. So, definitely that territory, when there were territories, up there in Wisconsin and Minnesota, was one of the better territories from what I heard.
Yeah. What usually got you hyped for a match that you were going to be in?
Coffee. No,
Yeah.
I mean sometimes coffee. Just I always wanted to put on a good performance. I always wanted to give my best in the ring, especially once I really figured it out more. I was able to know what I had to do, and so just getting hyped up and trying to understand the match a little bit and what we were going to try to present to the audience. So what is the story? What do we want to kind of happen? What is and a lot of that stuff early on, you're not involved in that. You someone else is telling you what they want. They're like, we want you to do this and that. And you might not know, well, why am I doing this? And it's not really your decision, right? We're going to do, they have a plan for that. But later, when I was in New Japan and we were more on the top, I was luckily to be in that top spot a lot. There was a lot more discussion about what we were trying to portray and what we wanted to do. And when you're in those discussions, then there's a little more weight on what you're doing. You weren't just out there going, okay, I'm just going to do my little bit and that's it. Then you're trying to think, hey, I have to really think about getting this guy over. I need to get this message kind of to the people or to the fans. And so that became a little more involved. And so that's what would hype me up for the match, would probably be just figuring out what we were trying to do and what we wanted to present, and then to try to execute that to the best of my ability. And I'm telling you, Blake, rarely does it go the way you want. You have this vision in your mind, right, of what you want to do, but your opponent has another vision in their mind that they want to do, and then your tag team partner has a vision in his mind, and the referee has a vision that they think should be this. So you're working with a lot of different ideas. Yeah, we're trying to make it as common as we can so everybody's on the same page, but you really can't. So nothing is going to go the way you think exactly, and you got to be prepared for that.
Yep. What was your favorite thing to do after all your matches?
Drink a beer was one of the top things, and I know that sounds weird, but I cannot tell you, especially when we wrestled. This was mostly in Japan, and again, this is another testament to the company of New Japan. So they would have a cold beer on the bus ready for us when we got out of our match, which was just such a it seems like an insignificant gesture, but that was such a big deal for us. So we would work really hard. We were usually towards the end of the match, at the end of the night, and we take a shower, and you go back on the bus. And a lot of times we either had to drive sometimes to the next town that night, which could be a long drive. Other times you're driving to the closest or whatever the arrangement was made for your accommodations to stay that night. But when you worked hard in a match and you really put a lot into it, and you were sweating and bleeding and whatever you were doing in this match, right, to get out of that match and to have a nice ice cold Asahi super dry, it's the best beer I've ever had, because it was that you earned it. It was a beer that you just really earned, and you couldn't wait to be like, I can't wait to have a nice cold beer. And I don't feel that way today about anything like that, like I did at that time in that situation at the end of a tough match, and know that I was going to pop a cold beer with a good friend of mine, Scott, and sit back and enjoy that. So I know that
Yeah.
sounds like a little small, like what are you going to do to enjoy the match? But that was something that I definitely look forward to. And I know Scott did too. It was a weird thing. And Masa, it was like a little bit of a celebration and a reward. So it was a lot of fun to do that.
Yeah. Did you go to like Cracker Barrel as like a traditional like restaurant after or anything?
No, we often, especially in Japan, we often went out to eat after, and a lot of times, which was nice. Again, this is about the Japanese culture. We had a sponsor, which was somebody who was involved in the promotion that usually took us out to dinner, and paid for the whole thing. So that was also a nice little perk, and we had it all the time. So usually the food was good. I mean, almost always, and you just ate as much as you want, and had some beer, and it was a good time to kind of come down and relax. And you're sitting there with your team, so the other team would be at a different place to eat, and our team, which was the NWO and the Japanese wrestlers that were kind of the bad Japanese wrestlers because we were on that bus. We'd all usually sit down together and have some beers and eat some dinner, and it was really a nice time to kind of decompress a little bit and relax. And I always look forward to those too, because there
Yeah.
wasn't a few nights off where you could like go out and do something. We were wrestling almost every night there. So, if you were going to
Hmm.
let off some steam, not even steam, but just kind of relax a little bit, it was usually with those guys.
Yeah, for sure. What would you say has been your favorite venue you got to wrestle at in your career?
I mentioned it already. Probably Cork and Hall in Tokyo, and just because I mean it's not a nice as venues go. It's not that nice. It's kind of small, but it's very intimate as far as the fans are very close. The ring is not there's not a big space between the ring and where the fans are, and it's just kind of like old school gymnasium, and the people were super fans of wrestling. So when you went there, that's where I said they would stomp their feet, and there were some nights there where it's deafening. You could just they're just all stomping their feet and so appreciative of the matches, and to do that and experience that and have that kind of a place like that was probably one of my favorite places. I mean, we did the Tokyo Dome, which is a big, huge dome show, which holds whatever 50,000 people or something. But it's not the same, because the fans are way in the back, and you have whatever monitors where they're just looking at the matches on a TV screen. So the more intimate, venues like Corrigan Hall were awesome. I mean, I'd probably say that would probably be up there for me.
Yeah. Has there been any time you have accidentally broken out of your wrestling persona?
Yeah, I mean you do sometimes, you try not to in the ring, right? But if someone's injured or someone's hurt, sometimes you have to recognize that and not and kind of break out of it a little bit. Sometimes you get really mad and you'll break character out of anger, with someone, and yeah, that happens, and hopefully you resolve that or you work through that or whatever it may be, and you work out your difference. But yeah, there's times you try not to do it on a televised show when it's televised, because obviously that's recorded, so it's even harder to cover up. But yeah, I mean, occasionally, you want to break character, you kind of not do something. But you as a professional, you're trying to stay in character as much as you can. I remember on the India trip, we did something where I was the guy. I don't know who it was. I think it was Tiger Jet Singh's son did a splash, like a big splash off the rope or something like that. And I was, had like a rib injury, right? And so they're taking me to the back on a stretcher, and of course this is part of the show. And then one of the doctors is about to give me a shot. You know what I'm saying? Like a real shot. And I had to say, hey, hey, hey,
Yeah.
like first I'm kind of like, no, I'm okay. I don't need it. I'm good. Right. And then you realize that this person thinks that I really have a broken rib, which I don't, and I'm okay. But, I was like, I had to finally say, hey, don't give me a shot. I'm okay. So, it happens.
Yep. What about, have you ever got embarrassed in a wrestling match due to like a mistake or something of the sorts?
Yeah, I think everybody has those mistakes where, you should have went right and you went left, or something didn't come out right. It's inevitable that you're gonna make a mistake, and those are gonna happen. Now, the difference in making those mistakes is that if you're good enough, you have to remember, I know it's a mistake. And maybe my opponent knows it's a mistake, and the referee might know it's a mistake, but the fans usually don't know necessarily that it was a mistake, right? But you don't know that. I mean, you do know that, but you're not thinking like that. You're thinking, oh, I made a mistake. So good wrestlers can cover up those mistakes, and the audience won't know there's a mistake. But of course, you know you made a mistake, right? And that happens, and it
Yep.
happens to everybody. So the question is, you're not that you're not going to make a mistake and maybe embarrass yourself somewhere, because you're going to. It's just how you handle it and how well you react to it. And if you stand there and make it look like a mistake, then the audience is going to go, oh, that's a mistake. But if you act like, hey, I meant to do that, and whatever it was, I mean, even if you meant to fall down, I mean, that's probably the worst one, is when you're like, go up to the corner and you're going to jump off and you slip on the rope and fall down. I mean, there's not really any covering that up necessarily, but that makes it more real, because you're not going to go up to the top rope every single time and jump off and execute a perfect diving clothesline, let's say, right? There's going to be
Yep.
times where you're going to make a mistake, and that, in a way, it's hard to think like that, because you're just thinking, oh, I just made a mistake, right? But to the fans, it might be important for them to say, "Oh, look, there he slipped." It's more real. So, you don't want to be super embarrassed. Hopefully, something that's really embarrassing in perpetuity or something. But you're going to get embarrassed. You're going to make a mistake, and if you're okay with that, it's going to help you a lot in the ring.
Yeah. What would you say has been the most scariest slash most dangerous incident in your wrestling career?
Probably India. That you know that riot that we had was very scary, because um, they had been really pushing in the paper, that it was like it was a real, really serious kind of thing, right? And so when people are believing this, and you have people that believe something that strongly, it can be scary, because you can't say, hey, we're trying to entertain you, when they think it's that you really hate this other person, or that there's really real heat between you and somebody else. So you have to be careful of that you're not overdoing it, because people get very emotional. I mean, that's why you have some wrestlers, especially back in the day, that were stabbed, or their tires are cut when they go out to their car, or something thrown through the windshield. And you know obviously the people that are doing this are beyond saying, oh, that was a great show, right? They're taking it more serious. So in India, that was the scariest thing. And those things can spiral out of control. I mean, thankfully they got back into control, but you know, like I said, there's people that were armed, there was people that had knives, there was people that had weapons, and you don't want to be in some chaotic situation in another country and have that kind of happen. I mean, as it was bad enough, and I think it should be on one of those dark side of the ring shows or something. I mean, Bill knows about it. Horowitz knows about it. I don't know if Chris Walker, he knows about it, but I don't know where he is. But
Yeah.
it was a scary time, and thankfully, nothing bad really happened. I mean, he had to get stitches and whatever, and Bill too, and it put a little wrench on the program, but it ended up being okay. But it's scary.
Yep, definitely. What has been the worst you've gotten injured in a match?
And you get injuries, that's for sure. I mean, thankfully, nothing terrible, but I had a bad ligament, pulled a ligament in my ankle, and was in a cast for a while. That was probably the worst injury. Um, you get the smaller injuries, but you just kind of deal with those. And if it doesn't, I mean, anybody who's been in the business a long time can give you a laundry list of the injuries, and they're numerous. You know, from cracked ribs, which I've had, and dislocated shoulders, and all kinds of stuff, all the injuries you can imagine. But thankfully for me, none of them required surgery. Just like I said, the fractured lower leg with a ligament. I was in a cast for a while, and I was able to come back from that. But I've seen horrific injuries, and I've seen it happen to a lot of guys, and if it's always there. You just hope that it doesn't happen to you.
Yep. If back in the day you got told you couldn't medically wrestle for the rest of your life, what would you do?
I wouldn't wrestle. I don't know. Again, um, I was not, that invested in professional wrestling, like as far as I wanted it to be a career, a lifetime career, Um, so I would have just picked something else. I mean, it was like I said, I was thought I was going to play maybe in the NFL and football, and that didn't pan out. And I was a personal trainer and still into exercise and fitness, and ended up kind of getting the pro wrestling with Clark, and I stayed in it. But had I not, if something they would have said you can't do it, I would have certainly been like, okay, that I'll do something else. I think it's important for everybody to have, yes, you can be focused on something and want to do it, but you also need to be prepared for, alternative career or job. And it happens, and a lot of athletes, especially, you don't have that many years sometimes to do it, to perform. And then you need to think about something else. So it's important to have something that you're thinking about, whatever that may be.
Yep, for sure. What would you say has been the longest you've had to stay out of action for wrestling?
It was a while. I went back to Japan in 2019 and worked a match there. And so before that, it had been a long time since I'd been in the ring, probably. Um, but I mean, I could still get in the ring if I wanted to, but I'm saying it's just kind of like, if you're not in a promotion and you're not working every night, you're not doing it as a job, it's kind of like, why, take the risk, or why even, get to that point. So, but for Japan, it was different for me. Again, these are, friends I get to see. And even if they called me right now and said, hey, we want you to come over and do a match, I probably would, just because it's New Japan. But for anybody else, I that would be probably off the table.
What made you decide to go to GCW and wrestle for them after your long break? And
GCW is which again, you're going to have to get me familiar with some of these, because I've wrestled for a lot of promotions and don't even remember some of them that were, they were called. And the thing with promotions is that they pop these names up, and they some of them last very short period of time, right? Some of them are long term, some of them, it's just a name that they attach to something. And I think for me, I've been fortunate enough to wrestle for a lot of different promotions, small ones, some in Europe, some in India, some in, obviously Japan, All Japan, New Japan, and different ones. And I did about 2 years probably where I was doing a lot of independence, right after I got out of WCW. And and I'm not sure really what some of those promotions were named or were going to be named, but I'm sure I was there.
yeah, what are some of the wrestling championships and achievements you have won so far in your career?
Well, the tag team champions, Clark and I were the tag team champions, and I was a heavyweight champion and one of the ones in Michigan. I forget the name of it. It was a Michigan promotion. But those things, and I got to be honest with you, they're fine, and it's good to be at that level where you can be one of the top, guys, championship, matches and all of that. But those things never meant that much to me, to be honest with you. It wasn't about becoming a champion or being a tag team champion or being this or being that. It was really more about just getting out there and doing a good job and trying to perform to the best of my ability, you know? And again, there's so much politics, as I said earlier, about who's getting what and why, right? And if you get involved in that and you're like, well, this person doesn't deserve this, or this person didn't earn this, and this person shouldn't have this, and this person, and why isn't this person getting this who's been, doing all this? You're going to be a very disappointed, employee. And I think if you can get out of that and not let that kind of be in the back of your head, you're going to do a much better job.
Yeah. And that company was UCW, the one in Michigan.
Yeah. Good guys. That's a good crew over there. I like those guys. And Michigan was a lot of fun to work over in that territory.
Yeah. Do you feel like you are worthy enough to be part of like a wrestling Hall of Fame, like an indie Hall of Fame or any?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. And to be honest with you, it's not something I care about. But at the same time, I have a pretty good history of wrestling. I have a good background. I've wrestled almost all of the greats back in the day. I mean, if I went through the list of everybody I got to wrestle, it's huge. And it's also a lot of the legends, because I wrestled some of the early Japanese guys. I was even in the ring with Baba for All Japan, and some of those legends, definitely all the legends in New Japan, a lot of the legends in WCW, a lot of them from the WWF and back in the day. So I have a pretty substantial body of work that I've been lucky enough to have been able to do, and that's what I'm proud of. I'm proud of that and everything that I've done. And I was never a superstar. I was never somebody who, everybody was, oh my God, it's, Cobra or whatever, or, Jeff Farmer. And that's fine. It doesn't bother me at all. But if you went to the promotions and you talked to the wrestlers and you said, hey, how was Jeff Farmer and how did he do and blah blah blah, I think you'll get a pretty decent response on that. I was a pretty good hand and I could do it pretty well, and especially at the end, I knew what I was doing, and I just feel very comfortable and just confident in the success that I had and how I was able to do it. And I feel good about that. It's something that I'm proud of,
For sure. Most definitely. Yep. Who are 5 wrestlers you would put into the WWE Hall of Fame that are not in there yet that you think deserve it?
And again, the WWE, I don't follow it that much right now. So those guys, I'd have to look at a list, but I think anybody who, especially the guys that were grinding it out a lot, right? That were on the road night after night. They might not have been the superstars. And you have to understand it in that business at the time too, the top guys, weren't going to let someone beat them. They were going to keep their spot, right? So you had a lot of guys that had no choice but to lose matches and to do the job, right? And those guys have earned, they've earned something, because they didn't have the ability or the privilege to say, I'm not going to do that. They had to feed their families, and they had to, do stuff, and they didn't have the ability to say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to lose this one. I don't want to do that one. And you have to have that kind of leverage if you're gonna. I don't want to say it's selfish, but you're taught to be selfish, and you're taught that it's about the wrestler. It's about you doing the best for your career, and that's not the way it should be. It should be about the group and the team, and about doing what's best for the audience and the fans and the promotion. And I think it's a tough thing to do. And you had guys that were like Bobby Eaton, and these guys, and even Barry Horowitz, who I brought up was the referee in this show. Those are guys that paid their dues in the ring and did a lot of matches. And I'd have to look at a list to see who was who. But without those guys, especially, you're gonna have a tough time building a company without those kind of the workers. And in Japan, it's kind of a joke that Clark, Scott and I used to call Kojima and Tenzan the mules because they carried the company. They did the lion's share of the work. Now they're also ended up being big superstars in the company, but at the time they were they were mid-level guys, and they were coming up, and they did a lot of work, and they were amazing, and they carried a lot of the show. And then later you want those people to get rewarded by either replacing the older stars. But the problem in the business is sometimes the old stars don't want to leave, so the new stars can't come up because there's nowhere to go, because the Hulk Hogan's not going to leave that place, or you name a superstar, right? They're not going to leave that spot. Mm-hmm. They're going to stay there. So then how does this young person elevate himself to that top spot? Does the other person have to die before you can get there, or how does that work? And yeah, some people can pass the baton if you get to a certain point, but a lot of those guys want to hang on to that, and it's tough. So I say to that question, you probably have a lot of guys that worked in the business hard and were good employees that should probably be looked at a little more serious. But I don't know. I'd have to look at a roster.
Yeah. What are 4 words you would describe your NWO Sting wrestling persona?
Amazing was one word I will use. Timely. It was definitely, it's not something that I came up with, right? So the NWO Sting character was I was asked to do it, and but yeah, it was an amazing opportunity for me, and I was able to parlay that into some real great position in New Japan, and yeah, it was a blast. It was fun. Now, it's not fun painting your face and doing all that stuff and the travel and all the other things that are associated with the business, but the character was fun. And the nice thing about that character too was that the Japanese especially knew that I was not Sting, that I was not Steve Borden. They knew I was the NWO Sting, that I was a bad version, a different character than Steve. And that also played in my favor, because it was I actually tried to do different moves and different things and try things that were not I wasn't trying to copy the NWO Sting as far as Steve's matches. I mean, I might throw a signature thing in here and there, of course, but it ended up kind of developing its own character, the NWO Sting, which was awesome.
Yep. How did the NWO Sting character come all about, and how did that just come about, and how did you get told to do that persona?
Well, I was doing Cobra, at the time, and I don't know whose original idea it was, but I remember Dallas Page, came to me and said, "Hey, Eric wants to do this NWO Sting, and will you do it?" And I said, "Yeah," because again, Cobra was kind of languishing a little bit. It was one of those mid-level characters where, unless you're part of a program and doing something, where you're going to go, right? So I thought this was an opportunity to be involved in something that I was ready for a little change. And they said, I remember Eric telling me that he said, if this gets out, I'm going to squash it. Like, we're not going to do it. And I said, okay. I said, whatever. I'm not going to tell anybody about it. So it ended up, I think it was, and I've said this before, and I don't know the answer. Eric might know, or Hogan might know, or Nash. But, I don't think it was going to be a long-term thing. I think they were just going to use it to try to swerve everybody in the audience and think it was Sting and blah, blah, blah. And it might have just been a one-time thing. And then they would have found me some other, character to be, right. And I was prepared for that. I mean, wasn't sure what was going to happen. But I think Hogan liked it, and I think they said, "Hey, let's keep this going. That we can kind of keep using this NWO Sting character, bad guy, to come in and disrupt things and cause a problem." And so they kept it. And then and this is an interesting story. When I remember telling somebody on a podcast about this, and then obviously, they started adding members. They added the Giant and Six and everybody. They started adding everybody, and Norton and everybody else. And the New Japan Pro Wrestling said, "Hey, we want the NWO guys to come do a tour here in Japan, and we want this to, kind of." They had a reciprocity at the time where there was a Japanese talent coming from New Japan to WCW, and then they were sending some WCW talent over there. And of course, Hogan and Nash and Hall and Savage were not going to go to Japan and do a 3-week tour. It just wasn't something they were going to even think about. But they said, "Hey, you can use NWO Sting, and you can use Buff Bagwell, and you can use Scott Norton, who's already legend over there, and you can use Mike Rotundo and some of these other guys." And so that's really how the NWO Sting, started over there in New Japan, and it has ended up, going back on the tour almost every tour for about 3 years, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. And what did you think of the change from Cobra to NWO Sting? What was the whole change like? Because
I
it must
mean,
have been really.
yeah, it was interesting. So I think the reason why they chose me was because, Steve and I were similar size, right? And so we probably could have been passed off with, look enough alike that size wise, it wasn't like, that big a difference. So, and then they had a guy named Andre who worked for a special effects. He has a special effects company, and they made prosthetics, and they put them on. They did a mold of Steve's face, and they did a mold of my face, and then they made little prosthetics, and they made us wear them, made me wear them, and then I put in contacts, and so we really went to an elaborate, kind of fake to try to fool everybody. And later we ended up saying, we don't need the facial pieces. We don't need the contacts. We just need to paint the face, and it'll work. And so I was letting my hair grow out. Excuse me. At the time, his was longer and mine wasn't that long, so I was growing it out. And eventually it was close enough where the fans really had a hard time telling the difference. But then what happened, which was funny, was that I was in Japan this whole, after they did the NWO in Japan, I'm over there working almost every tour. So they had to make fake stings of the fake sting. So then they were pulling people out, and other wrestlers, I think Chris Canyon was one time, and other people, they're just making fakes of the fake because I was wrestling in Japan at the time. So yeah, it was kind of interesting. But I think that's how initially, they kind of came up with the idea. And I was doing what I was told, basically.
Yeah, wow, interesting. What are 3 things that annoy you the most in wrestling?
Mm. Probably the politics is number one. The fact that it's not based on your real talent or your real ability, right? So there's not really, when you're coming from sports like football, if you're not good enough to earn your spot, or amateur wrestling, if you're not the top guy in your weight class, in other words, if I beat you in the heavyweight division, and you're not going to go to the tournament and be the heavyweight representative because you're not the best person, right? And I think in pro wrestling, it's not about that. And it's even not about, or you could look at all the different multifactorial reasons why you would be successful in professional wrestling. Maybe you're not good on the microphone. Maybe your physique isn't good. Maybe your look doesn't look good. Maybe you're whatever. There's lots of reasons, but a lot of it had to do, I think, with the politics and whose team you were on and who was your friend and who had the ability to give you a job or keep your job or whatever it is. And that was hard to navigate for somebody like me, especially who had no real ends, with anybody. I didn't have somebody who was in the business that was looking out for me or had my back or whatever you want to say. And I wasn't alone. There was lots of guys who didn't have any real connection. Uh, and the ones that did have some connection, we're fortunate to have those. And again, it's like a nepotism, as I say. It's a lot of friends and family, and that's fine. But that's not fair. It's not a fair climate. So that when you go from sports where you're earning your spot to where you're not necessarily earning your spot, that can be a little difficult. But that's
Yep.
the most aggravating thing.
Yep. Definitely. What are three things that you like the most about wrestling?
Um, I like the travel. I know this sounds weird. I mean, I don't like traveling, where you're grinding it out, but the chance for you to go to different countries, the chance for you to go to different cities, the chance for you to meet all the different people. I think for me, that was a big lure for me to get into pro wrestling. Not so just the fact that you got to do that, and then it was fun. The entertainment, there was times, and I've told this story. There was times, I had a college degree, and I mean I could have done other jobs, right? And there was times I said I can't believe that they're paying me to do this. Like I would do this for free. It's so much fun. And then there are other nights where I'm saying, why am I doing this? I have a college degree. I should be doing something else that I didn't want to be there. So that, would vacillate between, some of it being really, are you still there? I just saw your screen close out. Between being really excited to be there and happy and to just not, thinking I should be somewhere else. All right, Blake, I'm not sure if you're still there. All right. Well, it seems like we might have lost Blake. I know it's a long time and we've been talking for a while, but anyway, if he doesn't come back on in the next. Okay, you're back.
I'm sorry about that. My whole thing like cut off for a
It's okay.
second there.
Anyway, that's you know,
Yeah. If you could wrestle anywhere in the world, where would that be?
well, there's lots of places I haven't wrestled, so but I would probably just think Japan is probably one of my number one places to wrestle, just because I have history there, but just the culture, wrestling culture, is just really really amazing. So I'll say Japan.
Yeah. What has been the best fan art you have received in your wrestling career, if you've received any?
Yeah, I've received some. Um, I have some NWO slippers here that were funny. Let me see. I think they're here. Well, um, yeah. I mean, the Japanese stuff. They make every time we went on tour. They would usually have. They gave us a warm up suit, and a lot of that would have the New Japan logos on there and the badges and stuff. And they made a lot of stuff. I have a few masks from some of the other wrestlers that were friends of mine in Mexico that I wrestled with, and those are really cool. A couple pieces of art, but yeah, I would probably say maybe some of the masks I have from the luchadors. Those are kind of cool.
Yeah. Did you ever get to keep your gear, and do you still have most of your gear still with you?
Yeah. I've sold some of it to a few collectors, but I have a lot of it still. And you know, um, I don't know what I'm doing with it, but I still have a lot of it.
Yeah. Do you did you ever like eat certain meals before your matches?
No, nothing special. I mean, you don't want to be full, when you're going out there to wrestle for 20, 25 minutes. And usually, that was, when you're in the stadium or in the arena and you're waiting all day, and so you usually have a protein drink or whatever it was, while you're at the show, and then you wait until it's over because you don't want to really eat a heavy meal. So it was always, after the wrestling that you would go and have a nice dinner, because that's when you could relax. That's when you didn't have to worry, so much about even, you know, looking good in your outfit, so to speak, right? You wanted to make sure your stomach wasn't sticking out with a full belly when you're going to go out in front of all the people. So yeah, nothing before really. I was always after that. We went and had steak dinner and ice cream and whatever.
Yeah. What would you say is your favorite old theme song from the WWE when you were in there, WCW?
Well, I mean, you can Hogan's was iconic. His theme song. I'm a real American. That one. Um,
Yeah.
WCW. I can't think of anything offhand. I mean, there was some that had really good entrance music. I think Dallas Page has some really good entrance music. Uh, and the people that really thought about their entrance music, being part of it. Goldberg had a great, entrance. I think, whenever you have the lights go down and crackle and the pop and all that, you want to do something where the fans anticipate that you're coming out before you come out, right? So a
Yep.
lot of that's music that they hear first. And when they hear that music, they know that, actually Ric Flair is a perfect example, right? So his music, right? That would go on, and immediately everybody knew that Ric Flair was coming out. And so, actually, I'm glad I thought of it, because I would probably say Ric Flair had the best entrance music, because it's an iconic song, and also just it really got tied to him, right? Because every time you heard that, he came out, and it's a great, great. And if you have something like that really good, I think it pushes the performer even that much more, right? I mean, it's a part of it.
Yeah. Like Stone Cold Steve Austin and John Cena theme song too.
Yeah, both of them. Yeah, both of them were. And again, this is what as a production company, you want to find something that's going to get everybody fired up before they come out, right? So everybody's cheering and hollering and whooping it up, and that's exciting for the fans, and it's exciting for the wrestler, because believe me, when Ric Flair walks down there to his music, he's getting goosebumps, and he's getting fired up to get in the ring too. So they're I've told this before, that there's, even though you're putting on a show, your adrenaline and all these chemicals in your body are really happening, right? Your fight or flight
Yep.
is really taking place, and your body doesn't know that you're not in a real fight, in a way. So the adrenaline is happening, and all these things happen, which is a lot of times why the wrestlers go out there and they don't even realize some of the abuse that they're taking. And then when they get back to the back, and they come down from this chemical induced high from the adrenaline, then all of a sudden they say, oh wow, I have this big bruise, here, and I have this whatever cut, or you're bleeding, you don't even know you're bleeding, because it is that those reactions are real. And I think, for fans too, when they hear that music and they have this kind of reaction to it, I think that's cool.
Yep. If you could go back and revisit any year of your wrestling career, what year would that be and why?
Hmm. I would say probably at the height, and I don't know what year this is, 97 maybe, 97, 98. The probably when we were in New Japan doing the NWO stuff there, it would probably be that time. Just because, I mean, we were sold out every single arena we were in. So every night it's sold out, and we were at the top of the game. And I think I look back on some of this, and I just think, wow, had the problem not happen in the U.S. with NWO dissolving and all the different factions that they broke up into and all that. I think that NWO could have gone a lot longer, definitely in New Japan, because basically we had to shut it down, and it was still going. And but it could have been that could have been a pretty good run, even longer than it was.
Yeah. What are some things you are still striving to achieve in wrestling if you would still want to achieve rest stuff in wrestling? And
At this point, I'm too old to, really achieve much in wrestling. I have, like I said, my body of work that I've done and what I've been involved in and the stories I have and the people I've met and the fans I've met and the countries I've traveled to and all those things. And that's that's it for me. I mean, I would go back and visit, like I said, Japan anytime to see my friends there, or even other places I've wrestled, in Europe, and different places. But yeah, it's already kind of done. The cap is on the bottle, so to speak, every now and then I might shake it up and look at it. Scott and I talk about the good old days a lot and the times we were there, but it is what it is, and I'm again to say that I'm proud of what I was able to accomplish in the sport and the business of pro wrestling, and the people that I've worked with and wrestled. To me, that's like a reward in itself, and I'll always have that. Whether it's if I'm inducted to anything or not doesn't matter. Like I have my, what I was able to do, and that's what I'm happy about.
yeah. Out of all of the wrestling names you have gone under, which one would you say has been your most favorite? Like NWO Sting, Cobra, Lightning, Super J, or any others that you did?
Yeah. Thunder and Lightning is the most personal for me because it's what I started with. It's with my best friend, and it was just such a cool, gimmick. I really wish that had been something that we would have been able to really parlay into what I think it could have been, because it had a lot of potential, especially I mean, I wasn't that big. I was big enough, but with Clark was bigger than me, but the two of us, you know, were pretty imposing. And at the time, it's like a pretty cool gimmick. We both had long hair, and it was a little bit, I think it had some legs to be something really, amazing. And we never got to get it off the ground. And so, that's probably my favorite one. Cobra was fun just because, I mean, I came up with that. I just thought it was kind of cool to be, black ops kind of paramilitary character that, has some secret background in the military, blah, blah, blah. I just thought that was kind of cool. And then, I gave a dog tag out to one of the kids, or, saluted them or whatever it was kind of cool, a little bit different. I mean, there's obviously been army characters before and in the past, and there'll be some going forward or whatever, that kind of thing. But it's hard to find something that really defines you, and it's tough. So and I think the guys that can find something that really epitomizes them the most, like Stone Cold. I think when he did Stone Cold, like that was the best version of him there was, right? I mean, he was obviously
Yep.
talented as the blondes and whatever he did in Texas and all that, and he's a talented athletic guy. But when he found that character, that was a change for him. And same thing I think with Dwayne Johnson. And you don't always get that in the business. I mean, look at Dustin, Rhodes, or Dusty Rhodes, his dad, for that matter. I mean, that guy did a lot of stuff. I think the best one was himself, the American Dream, when he was the people's champ. That was one of the best. But, sometimes you get put in those situations and you make it, awesome and great. And sometimes you don't. So it's kind of tough to say what would have been the best character. But emotionally for me, Thunder and Lightning was the most emotional character. And NWO Sting, was it was exciting to be a part of that group, right? And to be And I did it a long time in Japan, also. And so that part was the top of my career as far as being wrestling main events and all that. That was the height of it, but not necessarily my favorite character, but it was definitely the height of my career as far as notoriety or whatever you want to say.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Sting retiring in AEW and his whole match that he had? Do you think they had him retire in a good way?
I didn't see the match. I saw some clips, little stuff of it. I know Darby Allin is a pretty talented kid, that he's teaming with. Um, I didn't see it, but my hats off, as I said earlier, to Sting, to Steve, for an amazing career. I couldn't be more proud of what he's done. And he was a role model for me, in the business, especially early when he was when I was in WCW early on, and seeing him and Lex and those guys in Flair and Arn and the guys that you had seen on TV, and then to see them in person and be sitting there with them and working with them, was a treat for me. And I always respected um, Steve and what he was able to accomplish, and I mean, he was the company, WCW at the time. I mean, he was the guy in WCW, and he carried it well, and he was able to walk that walk and be that person in WCW. And nothing but respect for him to keep going and to go through what he went through in the business and in his personal life, and then to be here and still wrestling, and to go out on top, go out on his shield. To me, is a great way for him to end his career, and I wish him all the best in his retirement.
Yep. If you came with a warning label, what would it say?
Mm. Uh, that's a good question. I don't know what to say. Beware. Don't aggravate too much. No, I'm kidding. Um, I mean, I have a pretty good temperament, so I would hate to say that I'm like, don't, stay away. But anybody can be pushed, a little bit too much, and it happens, and in this business it happens too. So, just I would say handle with care or something, maybe, like, but yeah, I don't really have a warning label. I don't think I'm somebody who flips a switch and is somebody else, um,
Yeah.
but some people are.
Yeah. If you could entrance with any animal, what animal would that be?
But Blake, you got some interesting questions. I'm probably a tiger, like a Bengal tiger would be awesome. Because that's my Chinese sign and my birth year sign. So I'd say a Bengal tiger. I mean, I'd love a grizzly bear would be awesome, something like that. But yeah, I wouldn't do either one of those, probably, because they could kill me. So I don't know that they're safe. But yeah, that would be cool.
For sure, yeah. What is your favorite wrestling quote?
I don't know that I don't even know many wrestling quotes. I mean, Ric Flair, has just his stuff, is off the chain as far as his interviews and some of the things he says, high flying, jet flying, profiling, his stuff, which I think is hysterical, but also just very entertaining. Um, I mean, I know that a lot of them have, and that's the bottom line with Steve Austin, and The Rock has some, and um, I don't really have one that I think is a favorite, but I think they're all good. I think it's good that you have something that you repeat like that to the fan base, and then they can repeat back, and they'll kind of know, because I think, again, that interaction is something that it takes you have to kind of know how to work that, and and if you're good at it, you can really get quite a response from the audience.
Yeah. If you, if you could choose anybody to manage you as when you were a tag team as Lightning and Thunder, who would
Yeah.
you want to manage you?
Hmm. That's another good question. Um, I mean, there's been a lot of good managers, over the years. Um, I mean, Jimmy Hart, he would have been a good megaphone type person for that. If I had to pick somebody kind of for the character for Thunder and Lightning, it'd probably been a Jimmy Hart type, that had a good mouthpiece to try to promote, or uh, the what's the guy with the tennis racket that was so good? You know what I'm
Chavo
talking?
Guerrero?
No, with the tennis racket, he was a manager. I can't believe I can't think of his name right now. Um, Not Chavo. I like Chavo, but Chavo was a wrestler. Um, oh my goodness, he was
Oh, Jim Cornette?
yes, Jim Cornette. Yeah, Jim Cornette. I always liked him and thought he was a really smart. I didn't know him, but he was a really smart about the business and knew all the stuff. And he was a he was. I think he was in Crockett's promotion, maybe, but he was good. I would pick him.
Yeah, that would have been good. How did you come up with your wrestling name, the Cobra?
I just came up with that um, because I thought it was there was a movie about Cobra, which I didn't pull this from. I think it was Sylvester Stallone or somebody like that. But I just thought about a snake. If you're thinking about like what are things that strike, kind of scary that strike. If you're looking for animals that you want to be, as like monikers for your persona, right? And so I just thought a snake, a cobra would be kind of cool, just because it's a cool animal and everybody's scared of cobras. And also, it could be like a code name in a military operation, Mamba, Black Mamba, or Cobra, or some kind of, snake that's scary. Just kind of came up with that Cobra, and then I just pulled together the background story, which wasn't really thought out that much, just kind of paramilitary kind of thing, and black ops or whatever you want to say, and as a code name, Cobra, kind of a thing. So again, I didn't really do a lot of research in the backstory for that, but I just thought it was fine and came up with the idea and the beret. I just thought that was another little kick, maybe a military vest, you know, and that's something I came up with. So again, wasn't a whole lot of thought process, but some way to. And also, I was going from a tag team, right? And I'd always been a tag team wrestler, really, with Clark and even some independents. I mean, I'd wrestled a few singles matches in independents and as a tag team, but I went from a tag team wrestler pretty much exclusively to a solo wrestler, to a singles wrestler. So that was another thing, was going from Thunder and Lightning to kind of Cobra, which was a difficult change because you're also thinking, I always relied on Clark, and I'm thinking, I can do this with Clark, but I don't know if I can do this on my own, by myself. You just kind of think, hey, this is a lot different when you're sharing that responsibility with someone versus now it's all on your shoulders. I mean, not all on yours. You have your opponent and the referee and whatever, but you have to kind of be responsible for your own stuff. So that was a big switch.
Yeah. What was the reason you two broke up as a tag team?
Well, we had a contract dispute with WCW, believe it or not, and we when we got to WCW, and Blake, we're gonna have to figure out a time to stop here because you're gonna have me talking all night about this stuff. But when we got to WCW, we went to immediately to the power plant, which was in Jonesboro, Georgia, and Jody Hamilton ran the power plant, and Sarge was down there, and Pez Watley and Mike Winters. And then, so we were down there with a lot of it was a training camp. And so we were under like a temporary contract with WCW. And part of it had to do, we had to go down to the training camp and work on our tag team stuff and whatever you have. But when we went to sign our contracts, this was probably like a year later. We'd already been wrestling and had wrestled a lot of tag matches on WCW, even the TV stations and whatever. And we had a hotshot attorney from Orlando that's told us, this contract is terrible. It doesn't guarantee you anything. There's no rights to merchandise. There's no, if they want to do this, they can do that. And so we didn't know any better. We just were kind of thinking, oh, well, they're going to expect us to counter this and come back with a bunch of this stuff just because we thought it was the, like kind of professional thing to do. But we didn't realize that's not what they wanted. And they didn't want to get in a legal going back and forth. And we didn't have any leverage. We thought we had leverage because we thought we were going to be the next big thing in professional wrestling as a tag team. And what happened was that WCW sent us a message and said we withdraw our offer for Thunder and Lightning. And so both of us were kind of like stunned by this. We'd already moved to Atlanta, and Clark was living with he was just got married before that. And I was living with a girlfriend, would be my wife, but we weren't married yet. And both of us were kind of like all of a sudden just out of a job. And so his family had a big trucking company in Florida, and his wife's family, and they said, come here and you work for us. And so we did, and that's why we split up. And then I was going to teach school. Actually, I was going to be a school teacher, and I kind of laid on the couch for a while, not sure what I was going to do. Did a few independent shows, and then Dallas Page maybe too. I went down to the power plant, and they're all like, "Hey, you should just do it as a single. Why you don't have to be a tag team? Just do your own thing." And so I said, "All right." So I went down there and started, working and as a single wrestler, and came up with Cobra. I know that's a long story for that, but that's kind of what happened.
That was a great story.
Yeah.
So I got a couple more questions or so for you to finish this off. What was the WCW War Games match in 1996 like for you, and how does it feel to know you got to be the one to be chosen out of all the members of NWO?
That's amazing. It was like one of the real amazing highlights, of my career. What was the War Games? So, yeah, those will go down. Those kind of moments, go down in your mind, as the pinnacles of your career and the time where you kind of had the most. I mean, the other one was the Tokyo Dome show and some other ones. Those are the ones where you get the most, whatever you want to say, pop from the crowd, and you get the most recognition. But for most wrestlers, it's not their best matches. I mean, if you were to interview Ric Flair, it would probably be a house show that he did somewhere where he wrestled 30 minutes or 40 minutes and tore the house down that not a lot of people even saw. It would have been something like that. And that's sometimes where your best work is. And it's not always on the pay-per-views. I mean, some people have great matches on pay-per-views, and I mean, it's great if you can time that where your best match is on a pay-per-view and your main event. But I bet if you talk to most of the wrestlers, it wasn't their best matches. Were usually not on those things. But that being said, it was the biggest, pop and the biggest response. And so in that regard, you're out there with all these greats, and I'm just thinking too, like, I don't want to screw up. I don't want to make sure that I don't make a mistake. I'm out there with all these guys, and thankfully, knock on wood, I pulled it off and everything was fine. But, it's a lot of pressure. It's definitely a lot of pressure when you're out there with the best of the best,
Yeah. If you had a retirement match, who would you want that match to be against?
Wow. I mean, maybe even somebody from Japan, like Chono or somebody, but I don't think though that he's up to wrestling. But I also, Sting. This goes back because I still feel like Sting and I could have done if we would have wrestled each other in Japan back in the day, it would have been huge because the bad Sting versus the good Sting could have been a huge thing. And I think, and I've said this before, we could have either tagged up together, or I make the save or he makes the save, and then we tag up as two Stings. I mean, that could have been, just so much fun and would have been incredible, had they done it. Now, there's lots of reasons why, and everything that was going on in the company at the time, and even personally for him at the time, and all of that. And I don't know any of those issues. I just think it could have been a really fun chance to have done something with the Stings, the real kind of double Sting. But never happened.
Yeah, I was talking to myself earlier about that. That's one of the dream matches I wanted to see personally was NWO Sting bad versus the good regular real Sting. I mean, that would have been like the
I'm
best. That would
I'm
have been
telling you,
awesome.
in Japan it would have been humongous because at the time, and this is I'm proud to say this actually. So they rate the gaijins, the foreigners in Japan, and so usually Vader was up high, Scott Norton was up high, Hogan is up high, Sting was up pretty high, I was up pretty high at the time. I was rated higher than Sting. Like I think I was fifth in the country at the time, which is awesome to be the as an American wrestler in Japan being rated at the fifth best wrestler over there. And if they would have done something around that time when my rating was high, and my rating was only high because I was there every tour and wrestling on a regular basis in the country. So they all knew me as the bad Sting. They all knew who I was. If you would have been able to pull Steve, at that time when I was at the high run in New Japan, that could have been a huge, Sting versus Sting match would have been humongous. But, it never happened. But you're right. It would have been, especially in Japan, it would have been a big deal.
For sure. Yep. What is one thing you would tell your fans?
If they're, I mean, my fans are probably old right now, but just appreciate the fans. I know that sounds cliche, and everybody says that. It's like the typical response of all the wrestlers. You're grateful and wouldn't be anywhere without the fans, and it is kind of cliche. But I have to say, you know, uh, especially my time in Japan, with those fans, that you can tell people that are genuinely, like what you did and really follow your work, and we're proud to be a little part of that. And to those fans, maybe a wrestling fan that liked the NWO, and I was like a minor part of that. And they're like, oh yeah, he was NWO Sting, but we don't really care about him. We care about these guys. I don't. Those fans aren't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fans that really are hardcore fans that knew the business, and they know that you did something, and they know that you are a part of something, and that you performed at this level. And the Japanese know that. The Japanese fans know that especially. And to them, and to those people in the U.S. that feel that way, I cannot tell them enough how much I appreciate their support and their loyalty over the years.
Yeah. So I got one last question. Do you have any advice for me to become a wrestler?
Well, it's a tough business. I don't know how tall you are, or how big you are, or what your frame size is, and how muscular you are, and all that kind of stuff. But the good news for you, Blake, is today it's not it's not limiting like it was, right? Um,
Yep.
it was very limited back in the day, because if you weren't big enough, it's like I'm never going to be a jockey, right, on a horse. I might say, what's your advice to me being a jockey? They're going to say, well, you're 6'2", you're not going to be 250 pounds. You're not going to be able to get on a horse. Even if I diet down, I'm not going to be able to be a jockey, right? And those are things you have to come to grips with. You're and in certain things, I'm not going to be in the NBA because I'm not tall enough, to do that. So I think having a realistic expectation about how far you can go in a business is important. That's one thing. But at the same time, there's lots of independent promotions, and if you really heart and soul love something, I would 100% say don't ever be discouraged by it, right? And the other part of wrestling is that there's lots of opportunities in the business of wrestling that aren't in the ring, you know, that aren't what you're doing right now is you're doing a job that involves wrestlers that are, you know, you're interviewing wrestlers, you're doing this. This is a job in wrestling. So there's lots of other opportunities to do it. Certainly, you know, getting in a ring to experience at one point, I think anybody could do that. You know, you get your gear, practice, you know, even if it's a small local show in Wisconsin, that you get in and you get in the ring and you do it, you know, nobody can take that away from you. And you can say, hey, yeah, I got in the ring in front of the crowd, I performed, I did everything. And you can do that. That's a doable thing for you to do. And if you have that desire, I think you should certainly do it. But as a career, like I have to say, I don't have any kids, but if I had them, I might discourage them from a career in professional wrestling because it's rough and it's hard on your body, and it can be really a tough business. There's easier ways to make money, you know, but you know, it's fun. And if you can do it, find a way for you to get involved and do something in a local area and get in the ring and do it. That's the only way you're going to know if you're going to, you know, if you can really do it, is you have to strap on the boots and get in there and see if you can take it and if you can do it. And, you know, but if it's a dream, you know, never let that go, man.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, Blake. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm glad that we have fans like you out there that appreciate it, because it is a lot of hard work. And anybody who follows wrestling and knows and has been interviewing people will know that it's an interesting career, but it's also, you know, I'm grateful to be a part of it.
Yeah, and I can't thank you enough for taking your time out to do this interview. It was a pleasure to have you on here, man.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
All
Have a
right.
good rest of your night.
Thank you.